Hello, good morning. You got very quiet. You are happy to be here, right? I lost one parishioner once before social distancing because I asked people to sit closer. Today you can do whatever you want and sit as far away as anybody as you want. The talk today, originally it was called, so we are going to have several sessions. It's impossible to teach this in one single class. So we're going to have some sessions through the year. The original title of the talk was Tools to Read the Gospel of Luke. And it was the Gospel of Luke because that's the gospel we need. If you read the newsletter, we explain that in the newsletter. Luke is the gospel that we are going to read in the next liturgical year, right? Beginning in Advent, at the end of November, beginning of December. But then I thought we still have 2 months to get there, so let's do it in general. And then I called it tools, and tools are here. You will see them in a minute. But I think it's more than tools. We are talking about a way to approach the Gospels, and I thought there had to be, in English, there had to be a better word to describe this, and I thought the word was technique. And I put it in plural. Technique is a way of carrying out a particular task, especially the execution or performance of an artistic work or scientific procedure. And I thought this encapsulated more what I believe we need to do to understand the Gospels. One of the problems we have with the Gospel is that it's very familiar to us because we come to Mass, we hear it all the time, and then we forget that if you were looking at any other document from 2,000 years ago in a whole different language, in a whole different culture, that you would not approach it in the casual way in which we approach the Gospel. Do you know what I mean? If it were any other document, but since we are very familiar, we think that we know what it says, then we don't give it due justice, and we don't develop the approaches that we need to develop in order to understand Scripture. Do you see what technique means? It's a particular task which is to interpret the Gospel. Preaching about the Gospel or applying it to our lives will be something else. Here we are at the stage of interpreting the Gospel, trying to understand what the Gospel says. It's a way of carrying out something, this getting to that interpretation, and it requires a particular skill. Then what I did is to put some things there so that I don't forget anything. I have half an hour more or less. We'll do several sessions, and some things I wanted to say today in no particular order. I have a favorite painter, and I was watching a YouTube this week where he explains one of his works of art, and there is an interview, and they're asking him, and he says, what we need to do is to develop a way to look at things. He was talking about contemporary art. No, you see contemporary work and you say, that's crazy. So we need people to help us to see what we are seeing, right? To develop the skills to see what we are trying to see. That's what I mean by developing a sensitivity. We have to recognize gospel as how do you pronounce that word? Genre. Anybody who's been to a Bible study I've given before know that I don't know how to pronounce that word, so I let you pronounce it. A genre? Did I do well? Took me 20 years, so we are getting there. It means, so when you read poetry, you know what you are reading. When you read the newspaper, you know what you are reading. There are different pieces of writing communication, written communication. So the gospel itself is one of these types. It's not biography. It's not like you are reading a history. You are not reading the newspaper. And we tend to read the gospel as if it were the newspaper, taking whatever we hear as historical fact, historical situation. And it's different than that. We say that the gospel, which means good news, there are stories about faith. It's catechetical theology. Catechetical is what we do here, teaching the faith. So the Gospels were produced so that followers of Jesus would understand what Jesus said, what Jesus did, and to recognize him as the Son of God, the expected Messiah, as you will hear in the homily today, and what to do with it, and how to respond to life situations with what the Gospels say. Understand the process of composition. I don't even know what I meant here. No, I do. The gospel, so we have names of the authors, right? We say Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, but we know those are traditions. We have given the names of 4 people for one reason or another. Another day we could go into that. But what we know is that the gospels are more produced by communities for communities. More than a single author, it could be a single author, but more than that, we need to understand them as open texts that were produced by communities for communities, with different sensitivities, with different concerns. One thing that was a concern for the community of Luke may not have been a concern for the community of John. One concern for John may not have been a concern for Mark. Something very basic, but it helps us. We put names of authors because it helps us to understand. The first gospel that was written, for instance, is Mark. You know that? Then we think that Matthew and Luke were written more or less at the same time. We know probably after the fall of the temple, year 70, a cataclysm. Do you say cataclysm in English? A cataclysm in Jewish culture, obviously, to the point that the temple hasn't been rebuilt until now. The Wailing Wall is just one of the walls of the former temple. And then we have John. We know, as I told you before, there is a gap in history, a gap in culture, a gap in language. The Gospels were written in Greek, a Greek called koine. It's a normal Greek, they call it. The way English today, you go to Spain, we don't speak it very well, but you can get coffee from anybody in English. You know, they will know what you mean. Some people will speak it better than others. Germany, Switzerland, you can go to many places in Europe, for instance, and with English, it's the international language. It's the language of software. It's the language of many fields of human enterprise. And it will maybe more elaborated or less elaborated, but most people will understand what you say. That was koine at the time the Gospels were produced. That was the Greek, a very particular Greek, simple, not very complicated. We could learn it, but that's the original language of the Gospel. Some people think it's Latin. Some people think it's English, believe it or not. You would take a survey and 30% of the people would say that Jesus spoke English. It's possible. But it's Greek, it's not Latin. People think that because the church, official language of the church is Latin, that then the Gospels were written in Latin. There is only one word in Latin in the Gospels. Do you know when? At the crucifixion, they have the titles of Jesus written in Latin. There is also Aramaic, which we believe was the language, the mother tongue of Jesus, the language he learned as a child. So there is a couple of times where you will see that. Nikki is not here, but she said yesterday in the chat on Friday, a translation is always a betrayal. In Spanish, it rhymes, so she said it in Spanish. So we have to take into account that what we are reading are translations. And a difficult process of translation because we don't have a single source that then we translate. It really is a patching of several manuscripts, and then a translation is acquired. The biggest gap, we have a language gap, as I told you. We have a gap of history, 2,000 years. Anything that was written 2,000 years ago, we would have to bridge that gap. We have a gap to understand Jewish culture and traditions. We don't understand that, and the Gospels are very, you need to know that, and we have to be educated. When the Last Supper, it's a Passover meal. The whole story of Exodus in the Old Testament gives you a pattern to understand what's happening with Jesus. So we need to bridge that gap, the gap with Jewish culture. And it's not impossible. I could bring a rabbi, and he or she could tell us lots of things that in one morning we would know a lot already, you know. So I'm optimistic that we can gap these things. So how was it written? I wanted to show you, I believe, if this works. You see that dot, blue dot there? I'm supposed to click there. See if it works. Oh, this fascinates me. So the gospel was first an oral tradition. We divide the first century in 3 parts. The life of Jesus from 0 to 30 years, more or less. More or less. From the first third to the second third of the first century, it's what we call the apostolic tradition. The apostles, people who had been eyewitnesses to the story of Jesus, they start explaining to others, to their followers, to their little communities, who Jesus was and what he said and what he did. And then the third of the first century, that's when these oral traditions become written traditions. But this is very flexible. We know Mark probably was written second third of the first century, then it moves to the third of the first century. You know what I mean? It's a little open, but that's what happens. Oral traditions become written traditions. To the left, you see what we call a papyrus. A papyrus was paper made out of a plant that is called a water plant. So you can imagine that not many of these documents have survived the passing of time. So we have some 70 of these papyrus of different parts of the New Testament that allow us to put them together. Yes? Good. To the right, you see parchment. Parchment is prepared skin, processed skin, that allowed these documents to survive a little longer. You see, for that we have some 5,000 different pieces. Between these pieces we recovered and some quotes of the first theologians, first, second, third century. Origen, for instance, would say, and Isaiah said, and then he would quote scripture. So then we can compare and we can extrapolate, and then we can come to a final result of what we think is the gospel. Do you know what I mean by that? I'm a little distracted. Is that okay? So to the left, do you see something in the left that is... I wish I had done something more clear, but do you see this is the 70 papyrus like this? That's how we come to the gospel today. So imagine the process from one papyrus like this, 2,000 years ago, copy, parchment, copy, printing machine, 15th century, I believe, and a translation on top of that. Do you see that? It's a hole. So sometimes the hole falls on a letter or on a word. Then somebody needs to say, well, we think it said this, we think it said that. Or there was a monk copying who got distracted like Father. I'm getting distracted with the breakfast, for instance. You know what I mean? So that happened. There was a distraction. Or a monk was upset. And he said, I'm going to do something else. You see, those things happened. And then here you see, I'm not sure, I wanted to show you, this one has vowels, but normally these papyrus were without vowels. It was only capital letters and was only consonants. So there is a process to trying to guess what it said. Do you see?
Are the papyrus only for the Old Testament, or they are all for the New Testament?
They are both, but we are talking about New Testament. The Old Testament is very interesting because I don't know if you knew that, but the New Testament uses a specific version of the Old Testament that is called the Bible of the 70. You remember that gospel that Jesus sent the disciples to? The 70. 70 was thought to be the nations of the world. And this version of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, it's called, the 70, is in Greek. So the Gospels were produced in Greek, in a Jewish Greek culture. And it makes sense because that's where the disciples went after being expelled from Jerusalem. Now I'm supposed to press here again. And go back. It didn't work, you see. It was supposed to go back. Oops, thank you. Here, here, here. It was supposed to go to the following page, but anyway, one gap we need also is geography, and that's when I can tell you about a tool to read the gospel, geography. There are many references. Do you remember what Jesus was last week in what we read last Sunday? When we read last Sunday, it says Caesarea Philippi. So where is that and why? Well, Caesarea Philippi is in the northern part of Israel, and it's the place where the Jordan River begins. Then if I know a little bit of geography, I know that the Jordan River goes from north to south, and it's the natural frontier between Israel and foreign territory. You know? I told you, now you know, and you know as much as I do, right? So you can understand next time that Jesus goes to some place, maybe you develop the sensitivity that means something. Where is Jesus today? What you said before. Capernaum. Where is Capernaum? Capernaum is near Nazareth, but it's not Nazareth. Nazareth is inside countryside, and Capernaum is near the lake, with all the different worlds that this entails. In Nazareth, Jesus will not be understood at all. In Capernaum, he will develop the first followers. It makes sense. When the title of the talk was Tools to Read the Gospel, if you want to go to a foreign territory, and when we read the Gospel, we are traveling to the time and to the place of Jesus, so there is one thing that is called a Bible Atlas. And you can buy it, or now you don't need to buy anything. You go to the internet, and you will find. It says Caesarea Philippi. You go to Wikipedia, Caesarea Philippi. Wikipedia is very good for scriptural things, for faith things, for canon law. It's excellent. But otherwise, you could get one of those. There are many, and that's the one I like, where you can find maps of the life of Jesus and the Old Testament and everything. I also have this. No? When you want to travel someplace, what do you get? A map. I have a map. So I can open it, and I can check things, you know. You check distances. When Mary goes to visit Elizabeth, 2.5 days walking, or in a donkey, you know. It's quite a journey at that time. But if you miss this and you don't have this sensitivity, you miss that point. You know what I mean? Very good. Sociology, I don't know how to pronounce this. Help me out. So you know what I mean by that. It will say the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the Zealots. So this follower was a Zealot, or this one was a high priest. It doesn't take a lot, but we need to know it. Who are the Pharisees? A couple of weeks ago, we had a whole homily on the Pharisees. It's surprising that the Pharisees and Jesus didn't get along, because they were the same social class, middle class. They were about open interpretation of the law. There were many things that the Pharisees would have agreed with Jesus. And maybe that tells you that Jesus precisely thought that the Pharisees were the people to change, or the people to dialogue with. The Sadducees do not believe in the resurrection. Why? Because they were very wealthy. So if you're having a lot of fun here on earth, why do you want to think about an afterlife that will punish you if you were selfish, you know? You wouldn't be, you see what I mean? Sadducees, Pharisees. The Zealots was a group of very radical, nationalistic people. So one of the disciples is a Zealot. And then it becomes part of the language when we say you are a Zealot. It means that you are a radical, correct? So that's important to develop that sensitivity too. Which one what? Sorry? I don't, depending on what version you are reading. Do you remember? Anybody remembers? I don't know. It's not important. It's important to know that one was a Zealot. Two main traditions. I think you know this. There are three Gospels that we call synoptic. Synoptic means that you need to look at them at the same time to get the whole story. And that's Mark, Matthew, and Luke. I say Mark first, even though in your Bibles, what do you find first? Matthew, because tradition was that Matthew was first and Mark was a summary of Matthew. Now we know it's the other way around, okay? Mark, Matthew, Luke, and then we know that John is a complete different tradition, a complete different theology. It's a whole different way of understanding the story of Jesus, explaining the story of Jesus. We'll talk about this more in the future, but then there is a whole thing to say about the connection between these Gospels. So one of the tools I would have presented to you is what it's called a synopsis of the 4 Gospels. You see, you can buy this also. You open it, and then it shows you this. You can follow the Gospels in columns. So if a story is in Mark, and it's not in Matthew, and it's not in John, and it's not in any other Gospel, it means something. If it's in the 4 Gospels, like the multiplication of bread and fish, that's important, and it's probably a sign that that's historically very important. You know what I mean? And that's very interesting, at least to me. Hopefully I convey that it's very interesting for everybody, but that's to be seen. The 3-source theory, we are not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but we know that Luke and Matthew had access to Mark. Then there is some materials that is common to Matthew and Luke that is not in Mark. Then there is independent material. For instance, the disciples of Emmaus, it's only in Luke. So we call that material independent to Luke. And there is some material, the Beatitudes, for instance. The Beatitudes is in Luke and Matthew. You see, you have different access. We believe that the different authors had access to Mark, for instance. And that John probably was written first, even though people say it's written last. So, you know, you can see the different sensitivities and how some gospels take from another gospel. Those are traditions we don't know. It's impossible to know. Absolutely impossible. What we know is that Mark is the first one. We know for sure. We know it's the simplest one. The Greek is very rudimentary. We know these things. We don't know anything else. Tradition, especially there is a guy whose name is Eusebius of Caesarea, who wrote the first history of the church. And many of these traditions come from that. But we don't care about the author the way we care about something written by Shakespeare, for instance. We know that Shakespeare wrote it, and that's why it's this way. We don't care about this the same way. We know that there was a community of Mark. We know the audience. For instance, in Matthew, we know that those reading Matthew were Jewish, sure. They are very respectful of Jewish tradition. Is the one gospel in which Jesus says, I didn't come to abolish the law, I came to fulfill it. That's very Jewish, you know? So we know that's Matthew. That's the sensitivity and addressing the concerns of a Jewish community, probably in Jerusalem. Luke, we know it's a community that there is some loose understanding of geography, so we tend to think that Luke was written for people in the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora in the Mediterranean Sea. So that's what we know, more than the specific author. Another tool, I told you this was written in Greek. I should have put this when I said that. So I have this. This is a New Testament. We call it an interlinear, which one line is in English and one line is in Greek. So if you read the English directly from the Greek, doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of Taoist and dice and things like this. But it tells you, and you can look at a specific word, and that could be a homily. You look at a word, how it's different from the translation, and then you see, okay? Another tool, this is a concordance. So if I see a word, I want to know where else I can find that word, because that tells me about the meaning or the importance of that word. You know what I mean? For instance, withdraw. Jesus withdraws. The verb withdrawing is 19 times in Matthew, I believe, whereas it doesn't come up in any of the other Gospels. That tells you that for Matthew, that idea withdrawing, the Magi withdraw from going back to Herod, for instance. No, do you need to be a nerd to be interested about these things? Or I hope to develop something that you actually get interested about. You know. The last point I had, exegesis versus homiletics. What do I mean by that? What I'm telling you about today is how to interpret the gospel, which is exegesis. That's what it means. Then we built a homily, but it's a different effort. You know what I mean? You use some interpretation to build a homily, hopefully, but a homily is not a Bible study. A Bible study is not a homily. You know what I mean? I had an example of a historical gap, and you will see it, and how it becomes part of a homily. You will see it today. Jesus says in the gospel today, you have to be like a child. And then I'm thinking about children in the 21st century. It's not the same as a child in the first century. Now children run our lives. You know? They stop traffic so that, you know, in the time of Jesus, a child was nothing. So either we bridge this gap to understand what a child is in the time of Jesus, or we miss the gospel, what Jesus is trying to tell us. Do you see it? Yes? So it's 9:42. I have 3 more minutes. And I wanted, when I was a child, I played soccer, because in Spain we all play soccer. And what we wanted was not to run in training, we wanted the ball, right? We wanted to play. So I wanted to show you a gospel that we have in a few weeks, and I thought I could show you some. If I accomplish, even in this little half an hour, to develop some sensitivity, I want you to read this gospel and tell me what you see. And from this, we will build up the next session on October 3rd. I want you to read it and tell me what you see that you would not have seen this morning. Isn't that fascinating? Kathy, can you read for me? Yes.
Yes, I can. As Jesus was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a sizable crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind man, the son of Timaeus, sat by the roadside begging. On hearing that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me." And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he kept calling out all the more, "Son of David, have pity on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take courage, get up, Jesus is calling you." He threw aside his cloak, sprang up, and came to Jesus. Jesus said to him in reply, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man replied to him, "Master, I want to see." Jesus told him, "Go your way, your faith has saved you." Immediately he received his sight and followed him on the way.
So tell me, what do you see? Did I accomplish anything? The location. He's going to Jericho. So I want to know what Jericho means. It's a very religious place. It's a very, you know, what else? That's a good one. What else? Sorry? The background. It gives you the name, which is very unusual. If you know Jewish stuff, Bartimaeus means the son of Timaeus. And then it tells you his name is Timaeus. It tells you twice what you already know, that his name is Timaeus? Whatever, okay. What else? What else do you see? Like how? He's a beggar. He begins a beggar, and he ends up a disciple. It says that he followed him on the way. That means he became a follower of Jesus. The way was how the Christian church was called at the beginning. What else do you see? Exactly. Let me see. I'm struggling with this. You see where it says, Jesus, Son of David. We want to look at how people call Jesus. Some people will address him teacher, rabbi. So they call Jesus a rabbi. You wouldn't call a rabbi someone who wasn't a rabbi. So unlike you've been told, we believe that Jesus had some rabbinic formation. Okay? This one calls him Son of David. What does that mean? That's very important. To call someone Son of David is appealing to a particular title of Jesus. The Messiah, the Son of David, a powerful political Messiah. By the way, how old was Jesus when he died? 33. Why? Why do we say that if we are not reading the paper? We are reading the scripture. At 30, the Old Testament says that David starts his kingship at 30. And then we know that in the synoptic tradition, Jesus' ministry was 3 years. So then we say that Jesus died at 33. That's how we know. So look at theology. It's trying to tell us that Jesus dies 3/4 into his adult life. Life expectancy of a person, of a young male in Israel at that time was around 40, 45. So it tells you that Jesus was around 30 when he died. But it makes more sense to link him to David. And then Jesus starts his ministry at the same age that David started his what? His kingship, his government, yes. What else do you see? Yes, he left with his disciples and a sizable crowd. So it tells you many people are following Jesus, but disciples are only a few. Many people are following him, and we see that many people followed him for the wrong reasons. That's a very good one. I also see that the beggar is it says, where is he? Sat by the roadside, and then he follows Jesus on the way. You see how he moves from the edge, from the roadside to the road. That's beautiful. That's poetry. That's gospel genre, you know? I think it's fantastic. It will have to be for you at least while your child is being confirmed, right? What else? Call him. To call someone in gospel language, it's to call someone to be a disciple. Anyway, that was the idea of the first talk, to give you some tools. I have some more. I show you I show you the concordance. I don't know if I explained that well enough, but word, for instance, roadside. I want to know if roadside appears in any other gospel. So here it is. We have books about specific topics. This one is very famous, The Misunderstood Jew. It tells you what I preach so often about the disciples thinking that this was a political Messiah. This book gives you the several sensitivities that were there about who the Messiah was supposed to be. You know, what I'm trying to tell you is that once you develop this interest and you develop this sensitivity, then a whole world opens. And it opened for me, and that's one of the main reasons why I'm a priest, because I went to someone who opened the Gospels for me. And I'm just trying to do the same for you, okay? Next session will be October 3rd at 9:10 or around 9:10. It's like the gospel. We say 9:10, but then it may be 9:13, okay? If everything works. Any questions, any comments? Because now we have to move systems and cameras and computers around so that we are ready for Mass. Anything? So thank you very much for being here today. Take care.